The stage is set for next weekend's Saturday night race at Daytona, the final regular season race. Let's talk about how the contenders did today at Dover. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric, and welcome to Out of the Groove. An extremely busy day in the motorsports world comes to a close. It started early this afternoon with the NASCAR Xfinity Series, their second race of the weekend at Dover. Chase Briscoe held off Ross Chastain to get the win over there. Then, of course, it was the Indianapolis 500, delayed 3-4 months, usually run obviously in May, run instead here in August without fans. It was an eerie sight at times. A pretty decent race, a very competitive race, although that final battle between Scott Dixon and Takuma Sato was cut a little bit short after Spencer Pigot got loose, got into the wall, then hit the inside tire barrier protecting the pit road wall. Huge damage on that car. Luckily, he was at least alert and okay. They transported him to a hospital after the wreck, but he was alert. So a scary end to the Indianapolis 500, but congratulations to Takuma Sato getting his second ever Indianapolis 500 victory. His first came back in 2017. Pretty exciting day for the Japanese driver. A great day for the Indianapolis 500, all things considered, doing the best they possibly could do. I know there are plenty of fans outside the track that wanted to be able to attend the race in person. Obviously very frustrating, I'm sure, for a lot of IndyCar fans that they weren't allowed to attend the Indy 500, even in a reduced capacity, but I guess it's just par for the course for 2020. But a pretty good race. I was extremely entertained. A lot of dramatic theatrics throughout. Some scary crashes that luckily all the drivers seemed to be okay from. Some extremely exciting moments, of course, like after Alexander Rossi got penalized, he then passed like 5 cars heading into turn 3 on the restart. Pretty exciting stuff before he ultimately wrecked as well. So overall, thought it was a great Indianapolis 500. And then there was the second NASCAR Cup Series race of the weekend, the second to last race of the regular season. Once again, Dover, once again, the Monster Mile. And today's race almost went exactly the same way as yesterday's race went. Different winner, of course, but much like yesterday's race, today's Dover race saw a pretty major crash within the first handful of laps. Yesterday was Kurt Busch and Eric Jones making contact. Today, Joey Logano seemed to maybe misjudge his exit or get tight or something. Got into Ricky Stenhouse Jr., sent Stenhouse into the wall. Behind him, Kyle Busch got run into the back by Chase Elliott as everybody checked up. A lot of damage on Chase Elliott's car. He actually was out of the race early at that point, went to the garage, and he was done. So unfortunately for NASCAR, in a day when it was going to be hard to get viewers to come over from the Indy 500 to begin with, losing your most popular driver in the first 5 laps, certainly I can't imagine helped NASCAR's TV ratings today. But unfortunately, Chase Elliott was out early. Kyle Busch had to limp through the rest of the race with damage. Stenhouse, same thing. But then after that, the race kind of calm down. But I want to talk about the top finishers in today's race. I specifically want to talk about the winner of today's race, and much like we did yesterday, we are going to talk about the playoff picture, because that was probably the most interesting thing to watch in today's race. Watching the 2 Hendrick teammates, especially Jimmy Johnson and William Byron, go back and forth throughout the day, and that 16th place line on the playoff grid changed hands multiple times in today's race. So we're going to talk about all that and more. We'll put this race on the Groovy Gauge at the very end, but to start with, let's begin with the winner, Kevin Harvick. Kevin Harvick and Rodney Childers were able to respond to Denny Hamlin's win yesterday in a major way. Yesterday, Denny Hamlin got the win in fairly commanding fashion. That was Hamlin's first win this year with the 750 horsepower rules package. Now today, interestingly enough, was Kevin Harvick's first win with the 750 horsepower rules package. And that's what I'm saying here, guys. I know it's boring for me to just talk about how good Kevin Harvick is, how good Hamlin's been, how impressive they've been. But really, this weekend, once again, we saw it firsthand. Kevin Harvick was fine yesterday on Saturday. He finished 4th, ran pretty competitively most of the day, but he didn't have anything for Hamlin. He didn't have anything for Truex, the leaders at the end of the race. But today, less than 24 hours later, the script had been flipped completely upside down. Kevin Harvick and Rodney Childers, who I still believe is the best crew chief in the Cup Series right now, they made all the right adjustments overnight. And that's, to me, what defines a championship team. The fact that they were still good. They unloaded good yesterday. They had some mechanical issues behind the scenes, but they were still pretty competitive yesterday. But the fact that just overnight they can go from pretty competitive to the best car on the track by a wide margin. Kevin Harvick is a great driver. Rodney Childers, like I said, is the best crew chief in the NASCAR Cup Series. The two of them have been together. This is now their 7th season together, so they have a very strong and now lengthy relationship. They understand each other. Communication is probably better between the two of them than it is every other driver crew chief combo in the field. But just the fact that coming into this weekend, neither Harvick nor Hamlin had any wins this year on 750 horsepower tracks. All their wins had come at bigger tracks with 550 horsepower, higher downforce, and the fact that Phoenix, the championship race at the end of this year, is a high horsepower, low downforce track, that concerned me. I'm like, hey, Harvick and Hamlin, they're winning all these tracks, but they're not winning with the 750 horsepower package. That could come back to bite them in the championship. They came into this weekend, and once again, Hamlin on Saturday, Harvick on Sunday, and nobody could touch them either day. I'm really impressed, though, with Kevin Harvick and Rodney Childers because of the changes they made overnight. They were competitive yesterday, sure, but nobody could come close to them in today's race, and it was the same car. It was the exact same car from yesterday. All they did was make some adjustments to it. That's crazy. That's scary, honestly. I know it's boring to keep talking about these two guys. They've now won more than half the races this season combined. They've combined for 13 of the wins in 25 races this year. I mean, that's getting ridiculous, but it's just clear as day. With no practice, with no qualifying right now, crew chiefs matter. And Rodney Childers is without a doubt the best crew chief in the NASCAR Cup Series, especially since Cole Pearn is no longer here. I think Cole Pearn could give him a run for his money. Historically speaking, Chad Knaus is great, but I don't think he and Byron have the best relationship at the moment. Right now, clearly Rodney Childers is the best crew chief in the Cup Series, the most adaptable crew chief in the Cup Series. Even the drivers that are racing today agree with me. If you remember a few weeks back, we looked at that driver poll, and they said in a pretty overwhelming margin that they think Rodney Childers is the best crew chief in the Cup Series as well. It's clear as day. That 4 car is stout. Now, I don't think Harvick or Hamlin have any weaknesses. I thought for a little while there that maybe the short tracks were their weakness. Not because they ran badly there, they just didn't dominate at the short tracks the way they've dominated the bigger tracks this season. But now, I don't think there are any weaknesses for Harvick or Hamlin. I think they're going to mow their way through the field all the way to Phoenix, and it's probably going to come down to the two of them in the final laps at that track as well. So it's Harvick and Hamlin's season at this point. We're all just watching in awe at this point. But anyway, let's move on from Harvick and Hamlin. Let's look at the top finishers because I want to talk about the points. The points still matter. Even though it's very likely Harvick or Hamlin's going to go on to win the championship, there are still 2 other spots that will be filled when we get to Phoenix at the end of the year. So let's talk about the playoff grid. Coming up just short today with what? Is this his 7th straight top 3 finish, I believe? A second place run for Martin Truex Jr., the second in as many days. A great weekend for Martin Truex Jr. He is quietly starting to figure things out with his new crew chief, James Small. Obviously, they got a win early in the year. They were solid at the very beginning of the year, but now they're running close to Hamlin and Harvick. They're not quite there, but they are close. But I want to focus on the 2 cars finishing behind Martin Truex Jr. Really, the focus of the day was on Jimmie Johnson versus his teammate William Byron. Coming into the day, Jimmie Johnson held the final spot on the playoff grid. William Byron, after a catastrophic day yesterday, was 3 points behind Johnson. But much like Harvick, who was able to completely change his car overnight and turn into the dominant car, William Byron perhaps saw an even more significant swing. Yesterday, William Byron ended the race 2 laps down in 28th. Today, he ran top 5 almost all day long, which Chad Knaus deserves a lot of credit, which is why I'm saying Chad Knaus is still a great NASCAR crew chief. They figured it out, and they were competitive all day long. They collected points in both Stage 1 and Stage 2 to actually vault themselves ahead of Jimmie Johnson ever so slightly and take back the 16th place spot. Jimmie Johnson, though, and his crew chief, Cliff Daniels, they made a gutsy call at the end of this race to go with 2 tires for the final restart. Jimmie Johnson led the final restart, lost the lead to Harvick quickly because Harvick was just really fast, but Jimmie Johnson held off Byron for 3rd, which was important to kind of stop the bleeding. William Byron got a lot of stage points in the first couple stages of this race. Jimmie Johnson collected a few as well, but Byron was pulling away from Jimmie Johnson, but Johnson being able to hold him off at the end of this race could come back to be huge, especially at the end of next week's race at Daytona. So right now, if we look at the playoff grid, Jimmie Johnson is still behind William Byron, but he is only 4 points behind his teammate. And the other driver we need to mention there is Matt DiBenedetto. Matt DiBenedetto is collapsing right now, and he had a really bad weekend here at Dover, finishing 20th yesterday. And if you look back at the top finishers, finishing 17th in today's race. 2 just not great runs, not getting many stage points either. Matt DiBenedetto is now only 9 points to the good, and with Daytona, the final race of the regular season, things can change in a matter of seconds at Daytona really quickly. Now Matt DiBenedetto can't be feeling too safe. And even William Byron said during his post-race interview today that he's not really thinking about the battle between him and Jimmie Johnson for that last spot. He's hopeful that the 2 Chevys can vault ahead of Matt DiBenedetto and knock the 21 out completely, and Hendrick can get all 4 cars in the playoffs. I'm sure that's what Rick Hendrick wants. And honestly, it's quite possible. We saw at the road course a week ago, Matt DiBenedetto struggled there at a track we all thought he would do well at. Struggled this weekend at Dover, a track that, I don't know, I think we hoped he could run top 10 at, especially as important as points are right now, but they couldn't show up. Going into Daytona next week, yeah, the Penske Fords historically have been really good, and that is Penske power behind that 21 car, so maybe next weekend will go well for Matt DiBenedetto, but much like I said in last night's video, you hate to put all your eggs in that basket. The Daytona Daytona basket. Daytona is just way too unpredictable. You can show up to Daytona with by far the best car and finish dead last. It's not a hard thing to do. Good cars wreck out at Daytona quite frequently, as a matter of fact. So definitely going to be a sleepless week for Matt DiBenedetto. Of course, Jimmy Johnson, William Byron, it's going to be stressful for them as well. Yes, the Chevys historically have also run fairly well at Daytona, but Daytona is Daytona for a reason. It's chaotic. And don't rule out the possibility that a driver like Eric Jones or Tyler Reddick or someone even further down the point standings, like a Ricky Stenhouse who's won at Daytona before, don't rule out the possibility of a wild card winner getting the victory next Saturday night. And if that happens, just being 16th in points still won't be good enough. So Matt DiBenedetto, William Byron, Jimmy Johnson are going to have a lot on their plates next Saturday night. And really, we're not going to know who makes the playoffs likely until the checkered flag flies. And even then, we might still have to kind of do some quick calculations to make sure we know what's going on. The one disappointing thing is that all three of those guys, DiBenedetto, Byron, Johnson, they're all good guys, There's not really a villain in that mix. Some people still don't like Jimmy Johnson from his years of dominance. Some people don't like William Byron, which, I don't know, Byron hasn't really done anything to win over any fans. He certainly hasn't done anything to scare fans away. And a lot of people like Matt DiBenedetto. He's a feel-good story the last couple of years. In theory, I'd like all three of those guys to make the playoffs, I'm a fan of all three, but only two can make it, and there's a possibility only one will make it. It's going to be crazy without a doubt, and keep in mind, guys like Matt DiBenedetto still don't have a contract for next season, so a lot of his future in NASCAR could potentially be riding on whether or not he's able to race his way into the NASCAR playoffs this year. Coming into the season, I think everyone expected Matt DiBenedetto to make the playoffs this year in that car. If he doesn't, he could be on his way out. Austin Cindric's looking pretty darn good down in the Xfinity Series, so just keep that in the back of your minds. There's a lot on the line next weekend at Daytona that we might not initially see. But anyway, there are your top 20 finishers. A couple other notable names to point out. Alex Bowman finally gets another top 5. I feel like that team has not had good speed in months, so hopefully this is a step in the right direction. Denny Hamlin ended up 19th after he had to pit from second with a loose wheel, so the pit crew did Denny Hamlin in today. Otherwise, they might have had something for Kevin Harvick in this race, but at least on that final restart perhaps, but really no one was catching Harvick. But a rough end to Denny Hamlin's day. He had great speed again. Don't want to discount that. But yeah, those are your top finishers. So let's talk about the race. Let's talk about this weekend in general now. Like I said at the beginning, this race was very similar to yesterday's race. Dover with the high horsepower, low downforce package this year. It was nice to see the low downforce return to Dover this season. I think we all knew after last season, I think we all knew before even last season, that low downforce was going to produce better racing at Dover. That being said, today's race and yesterday's race, both fairly uneventful. I enjoyed today's race, though, significantly more than I enjoyed yesterday's race. Maybe that's because I was flipping back and forth between the Indy 500, and that race was dramatic at the end. But what made today's race really interesting was watching Jimmy Johnson, especially in Stage 3, watching Jimmy Johnson come from a little further back in the pack after a bad pit stop late in Stage 2, at the beginning of Stage 3. He had to work his way through the field, and he had to do it methodically because it was not easy to pass at Dover. It's never been easy to pass at Dover, but watching Jimmy Johnson carve his way through the field, and NBCSN had the points there as they run kind of on the side, and watching that number between him and William Byron get smaller and smaller and smaller throughout the run was fun to watch. And then the final caution when Corey LaJoie hit the wall, and then the final pit stops when Jimmy Johnson and Cliff Daniels opted to go with 2 tires. Jimmy had a shot at getting his first win of the season, held on for third. It was a great drive at the end. That added some intrigue, some drama, got me on the edge of my seat for a moment, got my heart pumping for a minute. I was hoping maybe he could hold off Harvick for a couple of laps, maybe something would happen. That was wishful thinking. Harvick was too good. But I will say, Jimmy Johnson stole the show today. He clearly wasn't the best car or driver, although at the end of the race he was putting up some pretty good lap times. Harvick had the dominant car. He dominated the race. His 700th win for Ford in the NASCAR Cup Series. Kevin Harvick's 56th win? Ties him with Kyle Busch, actually, inside the top 10. I think 9th now on the all-time NASCAR wins list. I mean, Kevin Harvick really was the dominant driver today, but Jimmy Johnson was the show. So watching Jimmy Johnson move his way through the field and then hold off William Byron at the end there was fun to watch. So I'll give this race points for that. Let's go and put today's Dover race, another Dryden sponsor race, right? They were both the Dryden 311s. Look at that. Let's put this race on the Groovy Gauge. I gave yesterday's race a 48% in honor of Jimmy Johnson. Jimmy Johnson, again, was the show today, but I thought today's race was more entertaining than yesterday's race. Not a lot more entertaining, but a little bit more entertaining. I'm going to give today's race a 60% on the Groovy Gauge. I thought it was a little bit above average. I enjoyed it for the most part. I think what made this race interesting was the points battle. I know some people are asking, they're saying, why are we so focused on the 16th place playoff battle? Because even if Johnson or Byron make the playoffs, they're not they're not going to win the championship. It's very unlikely they're going to go on to win the championship or even make a deep run. Like, I get it, but still, making the playoffs matters a lot these days. It matters a lot for sponsors and for, like I mentioned, guys like Matt DiBenedetto, for example. It could dictate where he lands next year as far as free agency is concerned. So a lot still matters when it comes to making the playoffs. If you don't make the playoffs, like they mentioned during the broadcast today, you're basically an afterthought for the next 10 weeks. If you make the playoffs, even if you're out in the first round, you're still getting talked about for the first few weeks of the season, of the playoffs, and that's important to sponsors, that's important to your fans and all that stuff. So the playoffs still matter, even though, Cole Custer's not going to win the championship more than likely. Jimmy Johnson probably isn't going to win the championship, but he has had some speed recently, so I'm not going to completely rule it out. Racing for 16th is still important and still does have meaning behind it, especially when we're talking about Jimmy Johnson's final full-time NASCAR Cup Series season. So ultimately, this race was saved by the points battle at the end there, but it was still a decent race. Like I said yesterday, a boring race at Dover with low downforce is better than a boring race at Dover with high downforce. I think that is clear. Low downforce is the way to go at shorter, faster tracks like Dover, without a doubt. I had a good time today watching all the racing on NBC. Credit again to NBC and NBCSN juggling their broadcasts left and right. They had the Xfinity Series on NBCSN. I noticed they ran that race without a traditional play-by-play commentator. They had Steve Letarte, Jeff Burton, and Dale Jarrett in the booth, 3 traditionally color commentators. They didn't have a Rick Allen in the booth, but I thought they did a great job. Of course, on NBC for the Indianapolis 500, I love the addition of Mike Tirico and Danica Patrick for the second straight year. Dale Jr. during the pre-race show chimed in here and there. Lee Diffie and the crew, of course, that for IndyCar and NBC were fantastic during the race. And then the Cup Series with Dale Earnhardt Jr., Letarte, Burton, and Rick Allen showing his face there were great as well. So credit to NBC and NBCSN kind of tossing it between the different races. They called back to both races and all the different broadcasts. I thought they did the best they could, especially with a tight and difficult schedule with a full day of action on NBCSN and a major event on NBC. They did the best they could. I'm a little surprised they didn't schedule at least the Xfinity race for like 11 a.m. or something, so maybe they could have that race over before the Indy 500 started, but maybe that's just me. I'm not sure why they went with that, but anyway, I thought NBC did a good job with the broadcast today. I had fun. Did you guys have fun watching the races today? I had a good time. That's going to do it for today's video. Thank you all for watching this weekend. I hope you enjoyed. Subscribe if you are new. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Instagram. Continue the conversation on social media. Of course, a big thank you to these amazing Patreon supporters you see flipping around next to me right there. Couldn't do this show without their support, so thank you all a ton for supporting Out of the Groove. Got some more videos planned for this week. Going to be a busy week, I believe. Of course, leading up to the final regular season race at Daytona. Going to be a lot to talk about between now and then. Going to be a very exciting race. Remember, Saturday night at Daytona. It's the Oval. It's pack racing. It's the Coke 0400 traditionally that was moved to the end of August. I'm extremely excited. I hope you guys are too. But yes, I will see you all again very soon. We got plenty to talk about between now and then. Have a great rest of your weekend, y'all. See you soon.